His character hates my character because I'm with his wife.
I don't know if I helped Daniel make up his mind. We talked about that period of time.
He conquered the world on screen, embodying roles that made audiences cheer and critics marvel. But off-camera, his life was an uncharted battlefield. Fame, fortune, accolades, they were there, in abundance, but they never shielded him from loss, betrayal, or heartbreak. Behind the gleaming smile and the carefully honed charm lay a man wrestling with moments no script could prepare him for. 5 names, 5 experiences, each etched into his soul, leaving marks that would never fade. These weren't just professional setbacks, they were personal. Friendships shattered, dreams snatched, families torn apart. To the world, he was untouchable, an icon who had climbed every mountain Hollywood had set before him. But to him, each success carried a shadow, a reminder that even in the brightest spotlight, pain can linger. The first blow came in the form of a lost opportunity, the kind that could define a lifetime. Then, personal tragedy struck, threatening to unravel everything he had worked so hard to build. Career betrayals followed, each one a reminder that loyalty and trust are rare currencies in the entertainment world. And on the sets of some of his most beloved films, toxic relationships turned joy into tension, forcing him to navigate the delicate balance between professionalism and self-preservation. This story is not gossip. It is intimate. It is raw. It peels back the glittering facade of Hollywood and exposes the human struggles beneath. There are lessons here about resilience, about grief, about the resilience required to endure when the world seems determined to take more than it gives. By the end, you will see a man who achieved greatness, yet carried scars that fame could never erase. Each section unfolds a chapter in a life where triumph and tragedy danced in equal measure. These 5 names, the people, the events, the moments, aren't just footnotes. They are the forces that shaped him, for better or worse. Some were friends, some were family, and some were strangers wielding power and influence in ways he could never anticipate. Yet, each encounter left an imprint, a memory that would resurface in quiet moments, in reflections, and sometimes in sheer disbelief at the cruelty of timing and circumstance. What follows is a journey through loss, betrayal, and the enduring spirit of a man who refused to let tragedy define him, even when it threatened to. From stolen roles to fading family members, from professional displacement to toxic sets, the narrative weaves the personal with the professional, painting a portrait of a life both extraordinary and heartbreakingly human. Every actor dreams of a defining role, the one part that feels predestined, a character written seemingly for their very presence. For him, that role was the one he had rehearsed for in his imagination for years, picturing himself walking onto a set that millions would soon revere. He had been hand-picked, groomed, and whispered about in industry circles as the natural choice. It wasn't just speculation, it was promise. Producers had seen the spark in him, directors had sensed the presence, and even those who had studied the original material felt it in their bones. He was meant for greatness. But life has a cruel way of testing patience, timing, and resilience. In the mid-1980s, when the whispers grew into announcements, his heart should have been soaring. He was prepared, ready, and finally unshackled from prior obligations that had constrained him. The world seemed aligned perfectly, every star in the cosmos in place for him to take that leap into the spotlight. And yet, fate intervened. Not through malice, but through circumstance, contracts, and timing that could not be negotiated. He had been committed to another project, a television series that, though successful, had anchored him to a schedule he could not escape. The network, seeing the rising buzz surrounding his name and the role, reversed a prior cancellation in a move that was both opportunistic and devastating. Suddenly, the pathway that had seemed so certain was blocked by obligations he could not ignore. He was forced to decline the role that had been whispered about as a natural fit for him. Watching the opportunity slip away was agony. It was a torment compounded by the fact that the role didn't go to an unknown, an outsider, or a rival with hidden agendas. No, it went to someone he knew personally, someone he trusted, someone he called a friend. The betrayal wasn't personal, in the sense of deliberate sabotage. The friend had simply been next in line, ready to step into the role, unaware of the private anguish their casting would inflict. But for him, it felt like a door closing that would never open again. A chance, lost not due to lack of talent or dedication, but due to timing and circumstance beyond his control. There is a particular kind of pain in watching someone you care for succeed in a position you had been promised, one that no applause, no matter how loud, could ever mitigate. During that period, the world outside the studio remained blissfully unaware of his private turmoil. Interviews, press events, and appearances painted the picture of a man composed, confident, and unshakable. Yet behind closed doors, there were nights of silent reflection, moments of bitter disappointment, and the gnawing ache of a dream deferred. He would later describe it as smiling through pain, concealing the rupture that had taken place within his heart. Each public smile masked a deeply personal sorrow, a professional humiliation wrapped in the guise of friendship and loyalty. The role itself underwent a transformation under the friend's portrayal. It was different, distinct, and yet every scene, every line, and every performance was a stark reminder of what might have been. He watched from a distance, analyzing, critiquing, and yet never publicly disparaging. His respect for the craft, for the industry, and for the friend himself prevented any outburst. But the emotional toll was undeniable. Every review, every comment from fans, and every accolade received by the one who had taken the role felt like salt in an open wound. And yet, in his anguish, there was a strange, complicated admiration. The friend, stepping into a part that had been imagined for him, delivered a performance that carried its own weight. It wasn't a betrayal of talent or character. It was a twist of fate, a collision of ambition and circumstance. He hated what the event represented, a lost dream, a deferred destiny, but not the person who had stepped into the space he had envisioned as his own. The distinction was subtle, yet profoundly important. It was not malice he felt, but the stark reminder of opportunity lost. During this period, his life outside the industry was equally turbulent. Personal responsibilities weighed heavily, particularly as he navigated the health crises of loved ones. The juxtaposition of professional disappointment against the backdrop of personal pain created an emotional crucible, testing resilience in ways few could understand. He continued to work, taking on smaller roles, maintaining visibility, and reminding the world, and perhaps himself, that he remained a force to be reckoned with. Yet there was always the shadow, the specter of the role that could have been. His lingering at the edge of every decision, every audition, every meeting. Years passed, opportunities came and went, but the memory of that lost chance never faded. When the time eventually came for him to step into the very role he had once been denied, the moment was bittersweet. Triumph was tempered with remembrance, success accompanied by reflection on the years spent waiting, the friendships tested, and the patience stretched to its limits. He had carried the loss not as a grievance, but as a quiet fuel, a driving force behind every performance that followed. The role was finally his, yet it was forever tinged with the memory of what had been deferred, delayed, and almost stolen by circumstance. Looking back, he recognized that the experience had shaped not only his career, but also his character. The lessons were harsh but enduring. Timing is as crucial as talent. Resilience is forged in adversity, and personal disappointment can coexist with professional respect. He never spoke ill of the friend publicly, never allowed the bitterness to escape into interviews or press statements. But in his own reflections, In moments of quiet solitude, the betrayal, the pain, and the lost opportunity remained vivid, a testament to a period of life where promise and reality collided with a force neither could escape. This first betrayal, the one that cut deepest, would become a blueprint for understanding loss, disappointment, and the complexities of human relationships in the unforgiving world of fame. It was a stark introduction to the cruel dance of Hollywood ambition, a reminder that even the most destined of paths can be blocked by forces beyond one's control. And it was only the beginning of a series of events that would test him, challenge him, and ultimately define the man behind the public persona. Life has a way of testing the heart far beyond the confines of professional ambition. While the world watched him scale heights of fame and mastery, the personal realm was quietly unraveling. For him, family was more than blood. It was a second chance at the love, stability, and belonging he had long been denied. When he married, he inherited a blended family, stepping into the role of father to children who had already endured their own loss. Among them was one child who became his beacon, a symbol of hope and connection he had longed for since his own fractured childhood. At first, fatherhood felt seamless. The bond was immediate, intuitive, and filled with the warmth that had been absent in his own upbringing. He poured himself into their lives with a devotion few could match. Every milestone, every birthday, every quiet evening at home became an opportunity to nurture, to protect, to instill a sense of family that was unshakable. For a time it worked. Laughter filled the halls, celebrations were abundant, and the small joys of ordinary life were magnified in their collective presence. But happiness is fragile, and the first blow arrived in the form of illness. His spouse, the anchor of their household, was diagnosed with a devastating condition that no parent, no partner could prepare for. The diagnosis brought with it a tide of hospital visits, treatments, and sleepless nights. He became a caregiver, balancing the emotional weight of love, fear, and uncertainty, all while navigating the relentless demands of a career in the public eye. The household that had once been vibrant with hope became a battleground of endurance, resilience, and quiet sorrow. Amid this struggle, he continued to pursue his craft, often using work as a refuge from the constant emotional strain. Yet every performance, every public appearance was tinged with the undercurrent of grief. The loss he feared was not abstract. It was imminent, looming over every conversation and every plan for the future. Watching a loved one suffer, powerless to halt the progression, left him facing a reality harsher than any rejection, any career setback, any betrayal he had experienced. The death of his spouse was not just a personal loss. It was the loss of stability, guidance, and a shared dream that had been the foundation of his family life. The children, too, were left to navigate grief of an intensity that few adolescents could bear. One child, the one he had hoped to mold and protect, spiraled quietly, trying to hold on to fragments of family that seemed to disintegrate before his eyes. Attempts to provide guidance, support, and unconditional love were met with resistance, rebellion, and at times, complete withdrawal. The pain of watching someone you care for deeply succumb to hardship, especially after losing the anchor of your family, creates a weight that never fully lifts. It is a grief compounded by helplessness, by the realization that love alone is sometimes insufficient. The child's struggles escalated over the years, manifesting in behaviors that mirrored the chaos of the world they had inherited. Legal troubles, brushes with the law, and eventual descent into substance abuse painted a portrait of a life veering dangerously off course. Every headline, every whispered rumor, and every publicized failure was a dagger to the heart, magnified by the intimate knowledge of the pain that had led to it. For him, the child's struggles were not entertainment. They were tragedy unfolding in real time, a second wave of loss that no fame or fortune could shield against. He attempted intervention repeatedly, employing every tool at his disposal: financial support, private counsel, personal guidance, and the unwavering presence of a parent willing to fight for their child's recovery. Yet, as the years passed, it became painfully clear that control was an illusion. The child, now an adult, began to disappear from the family narrative, retreating into isolation, addiction, and eventual estrangement. This vanishing act, slow and agonizing, mirrored the prior loss that had first fractured the family. He had fought for stability before, and now the battle repeated itself, leaving him grappling with the same helplessness that had accompanied the illness of his spouse. Through it all, he maintained a public facade of strength and grace. Interviews, appearances, and social functions never hinted at the depth of anguish he endured. Friends close to him, however, knew the truth. They witnessed the private moments of despair, the quiet tears shed in solitude, and the endless nights spent worrying over a child he could not save from the path of self-destruction. Love alone, he learned, was sometimes insufficient in the face of compounded grief, addiction, and loss. Adding to the complexity of the grief was the cruel repetition of family tragedy. Another child, a sister, succumbed to the same illness that had claimed their mother. The sequence of loss was almost unbearable. First a spouse, then a child, and then another. Each event carved away at his sense of permanence, his belief that family could provide sanctuary from the hardships of life. The repeated nature of the tragedies reinforced a profound lesson. Even the most steadfast devotion cannot shield those we love from the forces that shape destiny, disease, and circumstance. By the time the third wave of loss emerged, he had become intimately familiar with grief's unrelenting rhythm. The once vibrant family life had contracted into shadows of memory and silence. The public saw an accomplished, dignified figure, the epitome of resilience in Hollywood. Yet beneath the surface, the emotional wounds were deep, raw, and ongoing. He did not allow bitterness to dominate his narrative, nor did he abandon hope entirely. Instead, he continued to fight in private, providing assistance discreetly and ensuring that some semblance of care persisted, even if reconciliation or recovery seemed increasingly unlikely. Ultimately, this chapter of his life was defined by an overwhelming juxtaposition: the heights of professional acclaim and the depths of personal despair. Each achievement, each box office success, stood in stark contrast to the losses he endured in private. His journey through family tragedy was not linear. It was punctuated by hope, setback, endurance, and reflection. And yet through it all, he maintained a commitment to love, to presence, and to the fragile bonds that defined family, even when those bonds seemed destined to fracture. This period of life, filled with grief, frustration, and powerlessness, would leave indelible marks on him. It shaped the way he approached relationships, work, and even his own sense of purpose. The professional world of films, roles, and accolades could never replace the personal losses he endured, and the shadow of that loss would persist alongside every triumph in his career. It was a lesson in resilience, in endurance, and in the painful acknowledgement that some battles are fought not for glory, but simply for survival, love, and the faint hope of redemption. In Hollywood, success is often measured in applause, awards, and box office numbers. But sometimes, the harshest blows come not from critics or competitors, but from the very people who should have recognized loyalty, dedication, and years of service. After years of carrying a franchise, after embodying a character that had become iconic for an entire generation, he faced a professional betrayal that cut deeper than any rejection ever could. It wasn't about talent or performance. It was about timing, perception, and the cold, calculated decisions of executives who saw him not as an individual, but as a commodity to be replaced. He had just concluded another chapter in the franchise, a performance that earned accolades, broke box office records, and reinforced his status as a definitive figure in the cinematic universe. The final curtain had fallen, but in his mind, the story was far from over. He was already envisioning The next installment, preparing for stunts, plot lines, and character developments that would carry the narrative forward. Every meeting, every discussion, every creative proposal was a step toward further cementing his legacy. He was not just invested as an actor, he was invested as a guardian of a world he had helped sustain. Then, in a moment of cruel brevity, it all ended. A phone call. 47 seconds. No ceremony, no discussion, no acknowledgement of his contributions. Just a cold message that delivered the verdict. You were a great character. Thank you very much. Goodbye. The words were clinical, devoid of empathy or recognition. They represented not only a professional dismissal, but a personal erasure. Years of dedication, creativity, and loyalty reduced to a line on a script someone else had written. The shock was profound. It was not merely the loss of a role, it was the loss of agency, of dignity, and of trust in the very system that had once promised stability and growth. The decision had been made months in advance, unbeknownst to him. Behind the scenes, the producers had been testing replacements, evaluating younger actors, and envisioning a reboot that would pivot the franchise in a darker, grittier direction. Every calculation, every strategy had been conducted without his knowledge. By the time he received the message, the choice was irrevocable. The very future he had been planning, the continuity he had been nurturing, was abruptly severed. There was no negotiation, no conversation, only a stark realization that the franchise had moved on without him. Adding insult to injury was the identity of his replacement. A rising actor who, while talented, represented everything he had built, yet would no longer inhabit. To the world, it was simply a casting decision. To him, it was the symbolic replacement of everything he had nurtured, the character, the franchise, and the cultural legacy he had helped shape. The betrayal wasn't personal from this new actor. He hadn't done anything wrong. But in the intricate tapestry of Hollywood, he became the emblem of what had been taken. Every accolade, every review, every box office triumph of this new era was a reminder that the throne he had occupied was now someone else's domain. The backlash from fans was immediate. Discussions on forums, letters from admirers, and public commentary questioned the logic of replacing a seasoned, beloved actor with a comparatively unknown figure. He watched silently as the world debated choices that had been forced upon him without consultation. Interviews required him to remain composed, his public face calm and gracious, even as privately the sting of betrayal lingered. For a man who had always valued professionalism, the dissonance between public perception and private reality was maddening. Beyond the immediate sense of loss, the professional displacement had cascading consequences. His perceived market value plummeted. Executives, viewing him through the lens of the very role he had been dismissed from, began to see him as too associated with the character to succeed elsewhere. Offers that once flowed steadily were reduced in scale and frequency. He faced a paradox. His defining role, which had elevated him to global recognition, had now become the barrier to further opportunities. The system that once rewarded loyalty now penalized it, leaving him to navigate a landscape that felt both familiar and alien. The personal impact was equally profound. Friends and family witnessed the man who had once carried himself with unwavering confidence retreat into quiet moments of despair. Tears, once rare, became more frequent in private, shared only with the closest confidants. The sudden severance from a role that had defined a decade of his life was more than professional. It was personal. It forced him to confront vulnerability in ways he had long avoided, revealing the fragility behind the public persona of strength and composure. Despite the pain, he sought to channel it constructively. Independent films, smaller roles, and carefully chosen projects became outlets for creativity, providing not only employment but a sense of agency and continuity. He worked to rebuild his identity outside of the franchise that had both elevated and abandoned him. Yet every new project, every success was haunted by the specter of what had been lost, the collaboration, the camaraderie, and the opportunity to continue shaping a universe he had called his own. Over time, perspective allowed for partial reconciliation. He never expressed public animosity toward the actor who replaced him, understanding that the betrayal was structural, not personal. Yet privately, the shadow of that phone call, that 47-second rupture, remained. It was a lesson in impermanence, in the ruthless nature of Hollywood, and in the painful recognition that even the most loyal and talented are subject to forces beyond their control. The betrayal was a teacher, albeit a harsh one, illuminating the fragility of trust and the cost of visibility in an industry governed by commerce, perception, and timing. Ultimately, this professional betrayal was a turning point. It reinforced resilience, honed his emotional intelligence, and sharpened his understanding of the interplay between personal ambition and systemic decision-making. He carried the memory not as bitterness, but as a quiet reminder of the unpredictability of life, the importance of inner strength, and the enduring value of loyalty to both oneself and those one loves. The public saw success, recognition, and charisma. Behind the curtain, however, lay the scars of betrayal, the pangs of sudden dismissal, and the unhealed wounds of a decade-long commitment abruptly severed. This chapter of his life serves as a testament to the complexities of trust, loyalty, and professional identity in an industry that rewards only the adaptable, the resilient, and the endlessly patient. It reminds us that behind every iconic role, there is a human story, one of ambition, heartbreak, and the quiet courage required to endure when the world seems determined to move on without regard for years of dedication. Even the most disciplined, composed, and seasoned actors can find themselves ensnared in an environment that tests patience, professionalism, and emotional endurance. He had navigated the highs and lows of fame, the relentless glare of public attention, and the crushing weight of personal loss. Yet, nothing could fully prepare him for the subtle, corrosive dynamics that sometimes fester behind the bright lights of a film set. Toxicity is rarely overt. It often arrives cloaked in charm, influence, or status. And when it appeared, it transformed what should have been a creative haven into a pressure cooker of tension, frustration, and quiet despair. On Daw. One particularly high-profile production, the set had initially promised joy, collaboration, and the celebration of shared artistry. But it quickly became evident that not all members of the cast shared the same commitment to harmony. A legendary co-star, an A-list diva whose reputation preceded them, brought not just talent, but a controlling, domineering presence. Their influence extended beyond the cameras, permeating scheduling, dialogue, and even the subtle nuances of performance. Small disagreements escalated into full-blown conflicts, each encounter leaving him to negotiate between maintaining professionalism and protecting his own creative space. He did not respond with theatrics or confrontation. That was never his method. Instead, he absorbed the tension, navigating the treacherous landscape with patience and tact, often mediating disputes that were not his to resolve. Yet each day carried the subtle weight of compromise, the quiet erosion of enthusiasm, and the mental toll of performing under constant scrutiny. He was acutely aware that every decision, every expression, and every reaction could be magnified, critiqued, or weaponized. The joy of creation became secondary to the challenge of survival on a set that had become, quietly, a battleground. Colleagues noticed his restraint, his calm demeanor, and his relentless professionalism. But beneath that polished exterior lay frustration, fatigue, and moments of genuine emotional strain. He often found himself reflecting on the contrast between the ideals of collaboration he had always championed and the reality of power dynamics that could twist simple creative disagreements into emotionally charged conflicts. The toxic presence on set was a constant reminder that success in Hollywood is rarely determined solely by talent. It is equally dictated by the capacity to navigate personalities, alliances, and egos. The ripple effects of this toxicity extended beyond work hours. Even in downtime, conversations and interactions were tinged with caution, restraint, and subtle negotiation. He developed strategies to preserve his own energy, carefully selecting when to engage, when to remain silent, and when to assert boundaries. These strategies were not just professional, they were survival mechanisms in an environment where emotional labor often outweighed creative labor. Each day required vigilance, self-awareness, and a measured approach that protected both reputation and personal well-being. Despite the challenges, he never let the toxic dynamics define him publicly. Interviews, appearances, and promotions reflected grace, humor, and warmth. The press never saw the emotional toll, the silent frustrations, or the small victories of personal endurance. Yet those who worked closely with him were acutely aware of the strain. They witnessed moments of quiet sighs, subtle withdrawal, and the careful calibration of interactions designed to minimize conflict while preserving artistic integrity. He had mastered the art of silent diplomacy, but mastery came at the cost of energy, spontaneity, and sometimes joy. In retrospect, these on-set challenges provided unexpected lessons in resilience, patience, and leadership. He learned to navigate personality conflicts without compromising his values or work ethic, to maintain focus in chaotic environments, and to lead by example even when the circumstances were far from ideal. The experience reinforced the understanding. That talent alone is insufficient. Emotional intelligence, strategic thinking, and the ability to remain composed under pressure are equally critical for sustaining a career in a high-stakes, high-visibility industry.